We're rolling. Okay, let's go to Jeremiah 17. Last week we sort of got off and running on this, and this is a pretty ambitious study. If you had the notes, we're up to about 31 pages now, and this is taking the light version of it. As you can imagine, Jeremiah is a massive book, and so the intention was not to do an exhaustive study on Jeremiah. That was not the intention, but so we're handling this in just a couple of parts here, really. But and the focus is in the title, and the title is the anguish of obedience. Is based on Jeremiah and really his life experience. And sometimes we say that in a cliche way about people when we say, well, their life experience, but this is truly Jeremiah's life experience. And what I mean by that is his ministry is his life, and his life is his ministry. And so we want to just kind of capture that for a second, in the sense that we might say being a Christian it is our life, being a follower of Jesus is our life. And, maybe fold that into the whole conversation here in terms of how that impacts us, how that relates to every aspect of how we live. So we just don't, sort of segment off that. So sometimes that comes into a conversation whenever we kind of categorize the secular and the sacred and things like that, where we say, well, that's the spiritual side of things, and this is the other side of things. So we really don't do that. It's all one combined thing. When we get to Jeremiah, in particular, we're saying the anguish of obedience. We're looking at his particular life in terms of Jeremiah fulfilling as God's prophet everything that God had intended for him to do, and where we subtitled it, when faithfulness crushes your soul. And we're thinking, well, wait a minute, there's a cost there to Jeremiah's obedience, and that cost impacted him. And we went into some length on that last week, and how Jeremiah lived in terms of the context of how he lived, what was going on in his life, and how that impacted him. So one thing I would say is just to draw our attention to the 17th chapter again, and the 14th verse, because this is kind of the key verse. But notice where it is in the book of Jeremiah. So let's just say it's, even though it's not exactly in the middle, precisely in the middle, but let's just imagine sort of chronologically maybe in his life, and I can't say for certain that this is chronologically precisely in the middle, but it's close enough that we could say, at least metaphorically, that this is kind of the midpoint, or in the midst, let's say, of Jeremiah living out God's purpose. There's a bit of a pause here, and he's saying, heal me, O Lord, and I will be healed. Save me, and I will be saved, for you are my praise. And I think there's something that we don't want to miss here. As much as, I might highlight in my Bible this heal me and I will be healed. In other words, he sees God as his only source of help, and not so much for physical healing here, as we'll see in a moment, but basically for this idea, I've been called to do this now. Everything you've called me to do is sort of in jeopardy, and I need your help, Lord, basically. But that it's that third stanza, if you will, if this were a song, for you are my praise. So there's something there that probably we should develop a whole lot more than we will. This idea that out ahead of all of this is a man who, in the midst of being obedient to God and being faithful to God, and that's a key word here, his faithfulness to God, his faithfulness amidst all that he is going through, which is massive. And if you read this book, even though culturally and everything, a lot of this stuff will be difficult to comprehend, but he's not popular, number one. So God said, here, go do that. Go ahead, go do that. be faithful to me, be obedient to everything I'm asking you to do, which is basically, as a mouthpiece for God, he's going to have to say a lot of stuff, and nobody's going to like it at all. So it's going to be a fundamentally unpopular message. And I have to say that, number one, he's going to start delivering this message to a group of people that are going to be, number one, in a state of rebellion against God. So can you imagine, you've got a nation that's basically in rebellion against God, and God raises you up, or let's say Jeremiah, but he raises you up, let's say if it's you, and says, I want you to go and tell these people that they're in a state of rebellion against me. I mean, that's just the skinny of it. And he goes out and he does this, and of course, who wants that light of scrutiny to be shown on them, right? To expose all that. So to say the very least, that's not a popular message. But let's just say at the outset that your ministry or your calling, your vocation is also aligned with a king who is instituting a bunch of reforms. So you think, wow, that's got to be a good deal, right? So let's just say you have a king whose administration now just happens to have discovered the book of the law in the temple and in all the ruins and the rubble and everything else, and they discover the book of the law, and which means that as they're going through the book of the law, they're seeing basically discontinuity between the way the people are living, which is in absolute rebellion, and they're seeing the way that the previous administrations have governed, which is horrific. They're totally out of sync with God's plan. God's plan is outlined in the book of the law, and they haven't been following it. And so the king says, well, we should be following this. Let's get following. So he institutes these reforms. And you would think then that, well, this would be great now because I've got the king on my side and I'm the prophet of the Lord. But no. Even at that, the people aren't sympathetic with the king's reforms, and this isn't even good. So even then, and it all begins to descend even from there, because not only is Jeremiah not popular, even when he has a favorable administration on the throne, but then when that king is gone, and when he passes and other kings come along, it just begins to get worse. And by worse, I mean Jeremiah is abused physically and many other ways. So this is a difficult situation we could paint in terms of Jeremiah. And when you come to chapter 17, let's just imagine this is the midpoint. And so I just want to highlight that word middle for us and throw that out to us, the idea of middle. Because I think it's at this point in our life that many times you're and I don't know how you are, but don't you find that right in the middle of something is the point where everything just becomes jeopardized? Right in the middle. I mean, right at the beginning, you're all excited, you've got the thrill of, oh, here's this project and all the promise of great expectation and everything else, but it's there right in the middle when the resources start to become depleted, when the challenges start to become, seems like greater than when you wonder, where's this going to come from, when all of the ideas that you thought were so great, and all the goals and objectives and every single measure that you thought was going to get you to now this one falls by the side, that one falls by the side, and your own personal resources, your own brain power that you thought was everything, and it just starts to become flatlined. You have all the resistance starts coming in. You have no friends standing with you. Every opponent is against you. Everything. Negative. No positives anywhere. No ally to be found. Then what? And it's right in the middle where the only thing that you have going for you is the imprimatur of God. The only thing you have for you is God called you. This is your faithfulness to God. I have to remain true to God. And that's Jeremiah. And so Jeremiah, at this point in his life, is crying out, heal me, O Lord, and I will be healed. In other words, God, if you don't step in, because that's where Jeremiah was, precisely. Jeremiah was at this point where he's wanting to give to God this sense of unwavering faithfulness. And that's what he feels his commitment to God is, except his own strength is completely diminished and all his resources are spent and everything is gone. So he thinks and so he feels, right? Because I think that's what's maybe critical here. You come to a point where God has called you to do something, God has placed a standard before you, and you take the steps, you say, I'm going to obey, and I'm going to be faithful, and you cannot make that faithfulness contingent upon circumstances. It always has to be contingent on the character of God, as difficult as that is. Because there is this cost of following God. And the cost is everything you have. It's just incredible. Jeremiah is paying that cost. He is experiencing that cost. And so now God is basically trying to teach him and us what we could call or term this rhythm of endurance. So let's just frame it that way. We'll call it that, this rhythm of endurance. And what might that look like for us? And maybe we'll just shoot through this. You know, these it's probably like 6 maybe little phases of this rhythm of endurance. In other words, how does a guy like this, just stepping in here at the midpoint, listening to him cry out to God, because here's a guy who's not turning back, here's a guy who's not quitting, here's a guy who's not saying, you know, God, this is about all I can take. This is enough. I can't take any more of this. No, he's not aborting the mission. So there is something in here, in this book of Jeremiah, there's something in here that gives us something that's incredibly useful to help us understand how we can endure similarly, though embattled, though emotionally compromised, though physically compromised, though challenged on every side, though all around us is nothing but negative circumstances, though we can't see any fruit for our labor, though all the above. And yet we keep on going and say, for you are my praise. You know, that's it. That's all that we have. So we began a little bit last week, so we'll just run through that quickly and then just move on to the other parts of this. But we can't say enough about the first one, and this rhythm of endurance. But the first one is identity, and this is so critical. And this goes all the way back to Jeremiah chapter 1, where God's basically saying, look, Jeremiah, you have to get this settled, and we do too. And that is, and you say, well, what's so big about identity? And notice how he talks to Jeremiah, like chapter 1 and verse 5, and he's saying, look, before you were born, before anything, before you were conceived, I formed you. And he uses all of these terms. I formed you, I knew you, I consecrated you, I appointed you. He uses these terms just to indicate to Jeremiah that, listen, whatever you're going through, whatever you're dealing with right now, just know that none of this is dependent on you, that it has always been dependent on me. And I have to take a step back and think about this, because we all get put in a position where we are eyeball to eyeball with circumstances that are just completely out of our control. And we see it, feel it, taste it, touch it, to the point where we'll fall apart at the seams trying to figure out a way out of these things. And then we cry out to God, and all the while God says, listen, just put your life in my hands. I've got this. And we think, how cliche, how patronizing is that? Just to say, well, you have this. And God says, I've always had this. And to think of how he underscores this with Jeremiah. Before you were even a thought anywhere, I formed you. I consecrated you. I everything. And this is the lesson that he's trying to underscore with Jeremiah. And you think of this analogy. Let's see. You look at a tree, and you think about a tree's fruitfulness, and how a tree's fruitfulness doesn't depend on its branches. You have to think about this for just a second. And you look at this beautiful fruit tree and all of its fruit that are on it, and you think, great, and how wonderful are those branches? And this is how typically we would think. But a tree's fruitfulness doesn't depend on its branches, it depends on its roots. This is the key. And this is a lesson for Jeremiah. This is Jeremiah's ministry. His fruitfulness is rooted in God's prior claim on his life. And this is what Jeremiah begins to realize and understand. And if you look at Jeremiah chapter 17 and verse 8, for he says, and this sounds like the first psalm, by the way, but he says, for he shall be like a tree planted by the water that exceeds its roots by a stream and will not fear when the heat comes. And this is how God is trying to correlate Jeremiah's identity with Jeremiah's current situation. You say, listen, you are rooted, your life is rooted in me. And this is how I think we have to understand our ability to endure. And who we are, our identity. Now, the same thing as our identity in Christ. And this is something that doesn't change. And this is something that gives us our meaning. And this is something that truly speaks to our circumstances. So how is that practical? It's because it's an illusion to think that it's up to me and my ability to impact my circumstances. It's about what God is able to do with me and through me. This idea, for you are my praise. I think this is singularly important because Jeremiah never lost sight of that. It's my connection with God. So when he cries out to him, heal me, O Lord, I will be healed. Why? Because you're the only one. He's not talking about physical healing here, as we'll see in a moment. Save me and I'll be saved. Talking about, how can any of this be ordered in my life? This mass chaos, this mess, anything. Jeremiah himself could not impact his circumstances. He could change nothing physically, nothing socially, nothing culturally, nothing financially. He could do nothing. Only God. Only the very God who formed him. Only the God who brought him into existence. This God, this powerful God, this sovereign God, is the only one who could impact any change whatsoever. So we come to the core issue here, and this has to do with this idea of faithfulness, this idea of lifelong commitment, regardless of the cost. And this is the notion of obedience. You go from then identity to obedience. And Jeremiah would be faithful in a resistant culture. So God calls him to this life of faithfulness. And you see in chapters 2 through 16, just by way of example, as Jeremiah sort of details to us how he lived. So what brings us up to this point of chapter 17, where he comes to this point of desperation to God, or this midpoint, where what justifies him even asking God, for this healing and this deliverance? What depletes him? What gets him there? And he's this prophet of God who is declaring unpopular truth and being used by God to declare an unpopular message. He's this tree that's planted by the water. He's being faithful, and he is a living contradiction to his age. And this is evident throughout the entire book in powerful ways. So not only by what he says, but by how he acts. And so one of the things that unfolds throughout the book is a lot of the ways that a prophet demonstrates through his lifestyle and through his actions the message that he's trying to convey and portray to the people. So Jeremiah just in very public ways was demonstrating just how much Israel was in rebellion, or I should say Judah was in rebellion against God. And this was much of the reason why he was personally paying the price for his message and remaining faithful to God. And so this puts him in a point of lamenting to God his own personal concerns and desires for God to help him, and calling out to God for healing when this obedience is costing him in terms of personal hurts and personal pain. This faithfulness of Jeremiah comes to the point of something that's sort of counterintuitive to many of us, because one of the things that I think believers struggle with is almost this mathematical equation that says, maybe almost like a child would with their parents. If I'm good, I'll get rewarded for that, and that things will go well with me. Things like we have this almost like this child, and so many times a believer might think, if I live my life a certain way, then God will bless me with good things and an ease of life, or I'm not sure how to frame all that, because I don't see that exactly working out that way. But Jeremiah is this classic example that there's a cost of obedience, and that there's a situation where his obedience, and we see this at the midpoint, is basically costing him a sense of personal injury and struggle, and such that he's actually having to return to God with this in a sense of asking for healing and deliverance. It is counterintuitive, if that's not a strange way to put it, but it sort of works against everything we might assume that we would expect in terms of our obedience to God. Say, well, God, I've been so faithful to you. You know, I've been just doing everything you've asked me to do, and yet I'm the victim of being misunderstood. I'm the victim of being attacked, afflicted, and unpopular, and all of these things. In other words, his obedience is drawing blood, basically. So here's this parallel that we find, for example, between Jeremiah and Jesus. Basically, we could draw this great parallel between the two. And in Jeremiah chapter 11 and verses 18 through 23, you have this passage where there's a plot against Jeremiah. It says, "Moreover, the Lord made it known to me, and I knew it. Then you showed me their deeds, but I was like a gentle lamb led to the slaughter. And I did not know that they had devised plots against me, saying, well, let us destroy the tree with its fruit, and let us cut him off from the land of the living." And so you see, here's Jeremiah, and he's like, well, I'm being obedient to God, I'm being faithful to God. And isn't this something where somehow in our brain we can think, well, I'm just going to be preserved from all the negative sort of effects of what I think would result from being faithful to God, when in fact I'm just this gentle lamb being led to the slaughter, and look what's happening. And yet we read in John chapter 1, verses 10 through 13, he came unto his own received him not, but as many as received him, to them he gave the right. Now, this is where some of the parallel changes, because Jeremiah is this lamb to the slaughter. We see Jesus being the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. And the parallels are not precise. The parallels are not the same, except both are lambs to the slaughter. But Jeremiah, of course, is rejected. Through Jesus' rejection comes atonement. Whereas Jeremiah's rejection comes condemnation, and this kind of, so these are not precise parallels, but we're just seeing this lamb led to the slaughter thing in terms of what? That your faithfulness can draw blood. It can be this way, that can result in suffering and this idea of rejection. So it brings us to this idea of this notion of, kind of like the analogy of a firefighter, that goes into a burning building. And this idea, we could say that Jeremiah smells like smoke, in terms of he's surrounded by judgment, oracles, conflicts, social fallout, not because he delights in the fire, not because he delights in this, but he's a kind of guy that runs into this burning house, if you will. He's a guy that runs into the burning house of Judah's rebellion at God's command. And this can be us many times. If this is how God raises us up to serve in certain contexts that where we're involved in situations where this is the cost of obedience. where it's not about our self-protection, it's about being obedient and what that faithfulness will require. So we can expect scars and not applause. And many times this happens in the face of a resistant culture that can leave emotional, relational, even vocational smoke on us, if you will. And we shouldn't misread that as failure, but as the normal cost of serving in hard places. So many times we're like that firefighter. You know, we can't say, oh, there's fire, so we run the other way. You know, we're the people that are running towards it, these spiritual fires, if you will. And a lot of times we're around judgment, we're around controversy, we're around broken people and things of this nature. So we bring these burns to God, not our bitterness. And I think that's what Jeremiah did. I mean, Jeremiah is going to bring all of this to God. You can read this, you know, in his book. He's not going to be bitter, but he's just going to bring this to God in the sense of asking God for restoration, asking God for healing, asking God for strength. And I think this is what we have to do, because there is no, I'm going to turn back. There is no, I think I'm just not going to be faithful. I mean, where do you check that box? Where do you check, let's see. Everything is just mark this down. Everything's binary. You know, everything's binary. There is no gray area. You know, it's either yes or no. It's either faithful, unfaithful. Either I am or I'm not. You know, so Jeremiah in the middle again, in the midst of all this. So he comes to this point where he's looking for healing, and you see this prayer of healing here. You know, heal me, save me, because he's absolutely convinced that only God can step in and do this. And his whole, if you can imagine a situation where, like how bad is it? Like how bad is it for Jeremiah at this point? How bad is it? It's as bad as it can get. Like, so it can't get worse for Jeremiah as a prophet. Why? Okay, as prophets go, you can't compare prophets with preachers. You can't. Who knows what preachers say? I mean, preachers, they get behind pulpits and they say all kinds of things. And if anybody held them accountable to fact check them, I don't know if they want to do that. A prophet, you better be right 100% of the time. Because if you're not, you're dead. That's the standard. And here's the issue with Jeremiah. He has been making some very specific prophecies about some very specific things. And that's out there. And if this doesn't come to pass, he's left hanging there. And so he's worried about, concerned about, wanting to be vindicated and saying, Lord, and they're basically accusing him now of insurrection, being treasonous, siding with those that are against Israel. And imagine this. Imagine you're standing out in public with a bullhorn, against, speaking things in favor of your enemies and saying that they're going to come and judge you and destroy you, and their armies are going to walk through your gates and so on. He's standing there in the gate of the temple in Jeremiah chapter 7. So all these things. And he's crying out to God and saying, God, restore me, give me strength. And so however we come to this point, we have to understand that Jeremiah is not asking for an out. He's not asking for an off-ramp. So if you ever come to this point where you're thinking, yeah, I need an off-ramp, and we do, right? We do. We think we come to this point and say, no, this is just, and we have to go back and say, wait a minute. Identity, obedience, wounding. I mean, these are things that are important. They're not just sermon punchlines. I mean, these are things that are part of this man's life. And thinking, wait a minute, this is a God who made me and who knows me and who's put me in this situation, and it was never on me to begin with. And he's fully capable of doing what he wants me to do through me. It was never up to me anyway. And we're not asking for a different life. We're not asking for a different set of circumstances. When we think of a marathon runner, run a few of those, we're not asking for a different race. We're just saying, give me the strength for the next mile. Sometimes we have to do that, Sometimes we have to do that. Give me the strength for the next mile because I want to finish this thing. I want to finish it. And I want to magnify you as I finish it. I think we know 1 Corinthians 10:13, but I think it's an important verse where it says, no temptation has overtaken you. But that word temptation there, testing, parasmos, testing, trial. When the fire, just think, no fire. Let's just put that word in there because I like that word. No fire has overtaken you. So God knows what he's put inside of you, and then he puts the heat on it. That's parasmos. He puts the heat on it to bring the faith out. So he puts the faith in, then he puts the heat on it to bring the faith out. He's not asking you to do anything. He puts the heat on it to bring the faith out. That's 1 Corinthians 10:13. And he says, no fire has overtaken you, but such that's common to everybody. Oops, sorry about that. That doesn't help us. Well, maybe we needed that. That was an illustration of 10:13. He says, but that's everybody. That's everybody. God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tested beyond your able, but will with the temptation provide a way of escape so that you may be able to endure it. But do you get that? So he'll provide a way to escape, not from it, not out of it, but to endure it. But to endure it. That is so significant because God, the God that called you, intends to get you through it, all the way through it. Can we run the next mile? So there's the prayer. There's the prayer in this. So what he's going for in this healing phase is this. Here's the prayer. God, get me through the next mile. Give me the strength, but relying on him. There's this idea of pressure here as well in verses 15 through 18. There's this idea of pressure. I'll watch this. Because verse 14 is prayer. Look at verse 15 and following is pressure. Look, they keep saying to me, where's the word of the Lord? Let it come. And the pressure is that that whatever he's prophesying hasn't come to pass, and the pressure is that it has to come to pass or he's going to look like a false prophet, which is basically it. So if God doesn't stand with him, Jeremiah's entire life's work just comes crashing down around him. So I don't know how you equate this in your own personal emotional state, but somehow we're getting kind of a psychological profile of Jeremiah here, and what he's going through. And so Jeremiah is taking all this to God. And he says, let those who persecute me be put to shame. But as for me, let me not be put to shame. He's asking to be vindicated. So what does that mean? And when you look at that, there's that tendency when the pressure comes to want to defend yourself. And what is he saying? God, you defend me. I think this is an incredible thing, because when the fire comes and the heat comes, we want to do everything that we can to defend ourselves. And one of the hardest things to do many times is to be silent and let God defend. Silence sometimes is the loudest testimony. So it doesn't end here, but you have chapters 18 through 52, which is a massive part of this book that deals with renewal, where God strengthens his servant for the long haul. Because you imagine you're coming in here and this is like the midpoint, and God and Jeremiah is saying, Lord, strengthen me, but then what's going on after this? And so much more is going to take place in the history of Judah, in the history of Jeremiah's life. Of course, Judah is going to continue to spiral downward. It's going to go into exile. Eventually, the temple's going to fall, and all of these things that's going to happen. But God is going to pledge a new covenant. In that new covenant, there's going to be inner transformation. There's going to be healing for the nation. There's going to be replanting after exile. All these things that are going to take place. So Jeremiah, there's so much he's not going to see that's going to eventuate in his lifetime. But he's being asked to keep speaking, keep remaining faithful when everything visible looks like it's going to collapse. In a lot of ways, Jeremiah's life and experience parallels that of a blacksmith who takes metal, heats it, hammers it, and it emerges tempered but not broken. And Jeremiah and Judah passed through the fires of opposition, siege, and exile, and inner anguish. Yet God's intent, especially in this latter part of the book, is to refine and reshape it, not merely to melt it down. In the end, we have Jeremiah's legacy. And I think somehow we have to look at what that means for us ultimately. His scars become part of his testimony. His perseverance, his healing becomes part of his message. He's someone who's going to pass something on to the next generation. And it won't be a story of ease. It's going to be a testimony of running with integrity under pressure. not everybody's willing to do that. And I just think Jeremiah is such a massive example of that. Somebody who's going to have all the scars, and you're thinking, where are all the accolades? Where are all the trophies? Where are all the, and you're not going to find them. You're just going to find somebody who withstood the fire and someone who endured. Followed that rhythm of endurance and stood the test and was a person of integrity under intense pressure. And God honored him. God stood with him. But this idea, for you are my praise, not you are my what? You're my bank account. You're my, what could you say? You're my praise. I mean, his heart was truly with the Lord. So the same God who formed him, sent him, refined him in the fire, also sustained him to the end, turning wounds into scars, scars into a legacy of faithfulness. So I hope maybe we can grab some of that from Jeremiah and impress that upon ourselves. Lord, thank you for Jeremiah and his life. Thank you for a book that continues to speak to us, even though we're just kind of skipping like a stone over the top of parts of it. I pray you encourage us to a life of faithfulness, and that's lived in the context of challenges, and help us to accept those challenges, because our hearts are convinced that you are our praise. And we continue to pray for David in this hour, and just ask that you'd just especially give him strength and encouragement and healing. Praying for Rich as well, and continued strength and healing also in his body. And just encourage us as the day goes on and throughout the week. And we pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.